Woodside!
Climate change is going to be a problem.
LNG producers held crisis talks. Tens of thousands of jobs put at risk.
Zero emissions by 2050.
It's happening. We're paying for it now. We've got to make some changes.
Shame on Woodside, when you gonna learn? You can't make money on a planet as it burns.
The calls for climate action have been growing in the resource-rich state of Western Australia. And the tactics of activists becoming more extreme.
Our pieces have been destroyed.
But for WA's former Environment Protection Chief Tom Hatton, this battle started 4 years ago.
There are a handful of very large resource companies that play a very prominent role in the state.
In 2019, Dr Hatton tried to put them on a path to net zero.
I think we were the only jurisdiction in Australia at the time without even an aspirational state reduction target, and the state's emissions were going up.
The guidelines triggered a massive industry backlash, culminating in a telephone call from the most powerful man in the state, Mark McGowan.
It wasn't a very long phone call. It was a very straightforward request that he did not want us to continue with those guidelines and wanted us to withdraw them. He didn't feel that consultation was sufficient within industry. We responded to an extraordinary request in an extraordinary moment in the state's history.
Tom Hatton is now speaking out for the first time. He wants the public to know what happened.
I had the whole reputation of 50 years of EPA on my shoulders, but also the environmental future of the state.
Dr Hatton says he was given 1 hour to brief his board members.
It was a very difficult moment for the board. And that phone call from the Premier was certainly unprecedented, and through the lens of the Act and the independence that it affords the board of the EPA, it was highly unorthodox and, in my view, inappropriate.
What is the point of the EPA if it just gives the government what it wants?
The board was very sensitive to this perception at the time that could persist, that somehow we had lost our independence. In the event, there's no evidence that that's happened. It made me feel under pressure to both defend the independence of the EPA, but at the same time maintain our influence on government so that we could get some greenhouse gas outcomes for the state.
Mark McGowan declined repeated requests for comment.
The ABC has spoken to people involved with drafting of the greenhouse gas guidelines and former EPA board members that Dr Hatton spoke to immediately after his phone call from Mark McGowan. All independently confirmed that Dr Hatton had told them that the Premier had asked him to withdraw his guidelines.
It was a political intervention by the Premier to make a political problem go away. And that political problem was very powerful industries running a campaign to try and shift costs off their balance sheet.
That campaign was extraordinary in its speed and power. Within 48 hours, articles, editorials and full-page ads funded by gas giant Woodside were plastered across Perth's only daily newspaper. The mining lobby quickly followed suit.
They became rather personalised attacks and challenging the sanity, the competency, the independence of the board.
They had the support of the Premier.
The EPA has put this out. It's not the government's policy.
From the Premier's perspective, that pragmatically this was something that needed to happen in order for him to maintain, and the government to maintain, good relations with very powerful resource industries.
Some of Australia's most powerful business leaders filed into Parliament House to put their case to the Premier. The measure would cost jobs and projects.
We're happy to have the opportunity to interact with the Premier and the ministers.
Piers Verstegen was director of WA's Conservation Council at the time. He was previously an advisor to Mr McGowan when he was Environment Minister.
The consequences of this decision are going to be felt here in Australia and internationally for decades to come. We're talking about billions of tonnes of additional greenhouse gas emissions.
4 years of extra delay means we've got a whole lot of new projects that should have been banned.
The ABC approached Woodside for comment, but it declined. The gas lobby APPEA said its concerns over a lack of consultation were made clear at the time. The Chamber of Mines and Energy says it supports a federal approach to carbon emissions. The state government is legislating a path to net zero by 2050, but in this resource-rich state, that won't be easy. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Perth.